Hello friends, thank you for joining me again. Today I am talking once more about United Kingdom frozen pensions. These are pensions earned by people who worked and contributed to the United Kingdom state pension system for many years. In most cases, they worked for 35 years to qualify for a full pension. But if they move to live in another country, in many cases their pension is frozen. It stays at the amount it was when they left the United Kingdom. No increases are ever added. This happens despite inflation and rising living costs. However, there are some countries that made reciprocal agreements with the United Kingdom many years ago. If retirees move to one of those countries, they continue to receive the yearly pension increases. But in countries without an agreement, the pension remains frozen for life. The result is that more than 500,000 United Kingdom pensioners living around the world are watching their pensions lose value year after year. It is also important to say that not everyone affected by frozen pensions is in the same situation. Many people living in countries like Canada have simply accepted the situation over the years. Some have other sources of income, private pensions, savings, or investments. They may feel the system is unfair, but they are able to manage. But that is not the full picture. There are also many people living on much more limited incomes, people who depend heavily or entirely on their United Kingdom state pension. And for them, a frozen pension over 10, 15 or 20 years can become a very serious problem. Each year, the value of that pension falls further behind the cost of living, and over time, that can mean the difference between managing and struggling. For many years, people from Commonwealth countries came to the United Kingdom in search of a better future. They worked in the United Kingdom. They paid taxes in the United Kingdom. They paid into the state pension system in the United Kingdom, and they earned their full state pension. After retirement, many decided to return to the country of their birth. I think most of us can understand that. Many people want to spend their later years close to family and in the country where they were born. But sadly, many of those countries, including some Commonwealth countries, do not have pension increase agreements with the United Kingdom, so their pensions are frozen. What makes this situation difficult to understand is this, and that is why, today, many pensioners in Canada feel that they have a very genuine grievance. There is something very important to understand about Canada. The United Kingdom does have a social security agreement with Canada, but it is not quite what many people think. This agreement allows people who worked in both countries to combine their years of contributions. For example, a person may have worked 10 years in the United Kingdom and then 25 years in Canada. Because of the agreement, those years can be combined so the person qualifies for a pension. They may receive a partial pension from the United Kingdom and a pension from Canada. This agreement has helped many people to qualify for a pension, and that is a good thing, but the agreement does not include annual increases for United Kingdom pensions paid in Canada. So the agreement helps people qualify for a pension, but it does not protect the value of that pension over time. And that is why many pensioners in Canada still feel that the system is unfair. The agreement helps you qualify for a pension, but it does not help you keep its value. Now, I want to say something very clearly. I do not believe this is a good situation, and I genuinely empathize with the many thousands of pensioners in Canada who are affected by this. For any government to turn its back on pensioners who contributed for many years, people who paid into the system from their wages, and whose employers also contributed, does seem to me to be unjust. So how did this situation happen? To understand that, we have to turn the clock back many years. In the early 1900s, there were many countries around the world that were part of the British Empire. Some of these countries later became known as dominions. A dominion was a country that governed itself, but still recognized the British Crown. By the 1920s, dominions were recognized as autonomous countries within the British Empire, and they were considered equal in status to the United Kingdom. One very important example of this is Canada. Canada became a dominion in 1867. It was actually the first country to be given Dominion status. Now we move to pensions. The United Kingdom introduced contributory state pensions in 1925, but at that time the pension was only payable in Britain, Northern Ireland and the Isle of Man. So if a person emigrated, they could lose their pension. This discouraged people from moving abroad. But in 1929, that changed. The government decided that pensions could be paid to people living in His Majesty's dominions. This encouraged people to emigrate to countries like Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And many people did exactly that. They moved abroad, but they continued to believe their pension rights were protected. Now we come to a very important moment. In 1948, the United Kingdom increased the state pension. It was the first major increase, but this increase was not paid to pensioners living abroad. The reason given was that they had not contributed enough to the new scheme, and that decision in 1948 was really the beginning of the frozen pension problem. Between 1948 and 1955, the United Kingdom made reciprocal agreements with several European countries. These included France, Italy, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Under these agreements, pensions could be increased each year for people living in those countries. But many Commonwealth countries were not included. In 1955, another change was made. United Kingdom pensions could now be paid anywhere in the world. But, and this is the important part, they were paid at a frozen rate unless the country had a reciprocal agreement that included increases. And that is still the system we have today. Over the years, the United Kingdom tried to negotiate agreements with Canada. There were discussions for many years, but the two countries could not reach a full agreement that included pension increases. At one point, Canada would not allow its own old age pension to be included in a reciprocal agreement. Later, when Canada changed its rules, the United Kingdom government said it could not afford to pay annual increases to pensioners living in Canada. So no agreement was reached. Then in 1981, under the government of Margaret Thatcher, the United Kingdom decided that it would not enter into any new agreements that included pension increases. And that decision in 1981 is a major reason why the situation still exists today. So what we are seeing today is not a new problem. It is the result of decisions made many years ago by different governments over a very long period of time. So this situation did not happen suddenly. It happened slowly through decisions made over many decades. But for the pensioners living with frozen pensions today, the effect is very real, and it affects their daily lives. So why has this situation not been resolved? It would be easy to assume that governments simply do not want to pay. But the reality is more complicated than that. The main issue is cost. If the United Kingdom government were to introduce full pension increases for all pensioners living overseas, it would create a very large ongoing financial commitment. And there is another concern. If the policy were changed, there is a fear that it could lead to legal challenges. Some pensioners might argue that they should be compensated for the increases they have missed over many years. And that could involve very large sums of money, potentially many billions of pounds. So the issue is not just about fairness, it is also about cost and about the long-term financial impact. But perhaps there is another way to look at this. A way that recognises the financial concerns, but also begins to address the issue of fairness. A solution that does not look backwards, but instead looks forward. So is there a possible solution to the frozen pension problem? I believe there may be a practical way forward. The biggest concern for any government is the fear of very large costs and the possibility of having to make back payments for many years in the past. But what if the solution did not look backwards and only looked forwards? For example, the government could choose a future start date. From that date onwards, pensions paid overseas would begin to receive annual increases. There would be no back payments, no compensation for the past. The change would only apply from the new start date. This would make the cost more predictable, and it could be planned for over many years. The government could even start with a small number of countries first. Perhaps countries like Canada and Australia, where large numbers of United Kingdom pensioners live. Then, over time, the system could be extended to other countries. This would not be a sudden cost. It would be a planned, gradual change, and it would begin to solve a problem that has existed for many decades. It would not be perfect, but it would be a start, and sometimes a start is what is needed. Although I believe the idea I have outlined could form the basis of a solution, I am also realistic. Any solution is likely to be gradual because the cost is going to be high, and from the government's point of view, possibly prohibitive if introduced too quickly. If we consider that, in general, people are living longer and the average lifespan may be around 85, this could mean a period of 20 years or more, during which pensions would need to be brought closer to the current rate. For example, someone who retired 20 years ago may have been on a frozen pension of around $120 per week. If that pension were unfrozen and brought up to something close to the current level, it might increase to around $250 per week. That is an increase of roughly $130 per week for just one person. When this is multiplied by many thousands of pensioners, the total cost becomes very large, and that is something the government would have to plan and budget for very carefully. Because of this, any solution would probably need to be refined further. It might involve a gradual introduction over a number of years. It might involve starting with the oldest pensioners first, for example, those over 75. It might involve starting with countries where the largest numbers of affected pensioners live, such as Canada and Australia. Or it might involve introducing partial increases over time rather than full immediate parity. Whatever the solution, it would need to be carefully designed, costed and planned over a long period. At the present time, with governments facing increasing costs in areas such as healthcare, social welfare and defence, it is unlikely that any major change will happen quickly. But that does not mean the issue should be forgotten. Because the unfairness of the situation and the financial pressure faced by many elderly pensioners is not going away. And as more time passes, the gap between frozen pensions and the current pension level continues to grow. So this is an issue that will not disappear. In fact, in many ways, it will become more noticeable over time. I will continue to make videos on this subject in support of the many groups and organisations that have been campaigning on this issue for years. If you or someone you know is directly affected, then sharing information and keeping the discussion going is one way to ensure that the issue is not forgotten. In conclusion, in our next video, we will be looking at the history behind the events that have created the same problem we are seeing in Canada, but this time affecting UK pensioners in Australia. Between 1945 and 1972, immigration from the United Kingdom to Australia was very popular. It was supported by both the UK and Australian governments and promoted under the Assisted Passage Migration Scheme. In Australia, the migrants who travelled under this scheme became known as the £10 POMs. Many people were encouraged to travel to the other side of the world to help build a new life and support a growing country. But looking back today, one has to ask the question, would they have made that journey if they had known that in later life, many of them would be left with frozen and increasingly inadequate UK pensions? That is what we will be looking at next.